The issues affecting you. Revealed, explained, discussed. Now on WGAL 8 in Focus.
Hello, I'm Susan Shapiro. As the war in Ukraine continues, people in the Susquehanna Valley are watching it play out right on their screens. We've seen the images of destruction, injury, and families torn apart on the news and on social media. It can be a lot to take in. We'll talk with two experts about how to recognize signs of anxiety and trauma in yourself and your children, and some things you can do about it. Tonight, we put how you watch the war in focus. I'm joined now by Mark Sigmund, a therapist from Retreat Behavioral Health. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Mark, in the last couple of weeks, we have seen a war-torn nation in Ukraine, but yet we are seeing such vivid images here at home from halfway around the world. How is that affecting people?
Well, I think that it's causing a lot of stress for people, particularly if you have had trauma in the past. By seeing these images and watching the news, it can bring up old trauma, and it can also cause vicarious trauma. So it's been really tough for people because a lot of people that have been around, and are a little bit older remember the Soviet Union back in the 80s and being worried about nuclear war. And for all of a sudden, after going through COVID-19 and this huge pandemic and being stressed out for 2 years, to all of a sudden be thinking about this again is very stressful for people. And it can lead to a lot of sort of exhaustion, just especially being on top of the pandemic from the last 2 years.
I think people feel so helpless.
Yes, you feel so helpless because there is such a powerlessness about it. And it was the same thing with COVID-19. All of a sudden we had this pandemic and what can you control? And now we have this war over there where we're seeing vivid images, and some of them are of children that are being hurt and hospitals being blown up. And I'll tell you, it's definitely bringing on a lot of what we call the fight or flight response. And that's when when your stress hormones start going, adrenaline starts going, you might start feeling more irritable, more anxious throughout the day. And like I said, being tacked on to the last couple years is not good.
Does the fact that this is all over social media and, obviously every network has crews there, does that really up the playing field?
It really does. Because if you go on Facebook or any of the social media, you're being inundated by pictures a lot of times. Also, when you're watching the news, they're showing some very graphic images. I mean, I was just watching it last night and they were showing that, a children's hospital was blown up. And, so again, watching this throughout the day and hearing about it takes its toll. So, we're really big, on this whole idea of self-care during times like this, and just being careful, especially if like we said, if you've had trauma in the past. Some people with PTSD, even war veterans that are seeing this, it's what we call a trigger for them.
So those images that they're seeing can take them back to that point. I know we've talked about that with veterans.
Yes, it can take them back to that point, and it can bring up memories of their own, being involved in battle, and bring up that stress response that happened way back when they were in battle themselves. But it's not just soldiers and things, but anybody that's been involved in traumatic situations. I mean, it could be even a car accident that somebody was in, and it would, this can remind them of the trauma they went through. So it's really important to be aware of this.
I imagine some people might not even realize that's happening.
Yes, still, sometimes what happens is our defense mechanisms kick in and we stuff it down. And really what you start seeing that somebody's having a lot of fear and they're feeling on edge and they're feeling a little bit more stressed and irritable. And so it's not always right in the forefront. But there are people that watch the news all day. And they've been doing this ever since the beginning of the pandemic. And when you're doing that, you can't help it, but you're taking all that in, and it's creating this stress response in your system.
All right. Well, Mark, stay with us. We'll talk about what people can do if they do have that stress response when we come back.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus, coverage you can count on.
We continue our conversation with Mark Sigmund, who's a therapist at Retreat Behavioral Health. Mark, you talked about a lot of reactions that people are having to seeing this war in Ukraine. So how do you know if you may have a problem with this?
Well, if it's starting to interfere with your life, and one of the things that you'll notice is that if you're on edge a lot more, and like we said, you can't always attribute it back to this, but if it's causing a lot of fear in your life, what's going on in Ukraine, and you're starting to obsess and ruminate about it, then it's starting to get into your life, right? And a lot of people are starting to kind of ruminate on this and the fear of, wow, is there going to be a nuclear war? Is there going to, and it's creating a lot of anxiety for people. So, one of the things that we talk about, it's really, really important to, really limit your exposure to some of this. There's something called vicarious trauma, and that's when you're actually watching, you're watching the news and you're seeing these images, and it's really creating a lot of this kind of trauma response. Even though you're not in the trauma, you're having a reaction to it. And so one of the things that we talk about is, you want to limit your exposure and not be watching the news all day. And we've been talking about it for a couple of years about putting your cell phones down and not being on social media all day. But more importantly, learning to relax the body. That's huge when it comes to trauma.
All right. And what are some tips to do that?
Well, one easy thing that you can do is just set aside like a safe place in your home, or it could be you have a nature spot near your work that you can go to this nature spot and just focus on your breathing. It's as simple as that. You don't have to change your breathing. Focus on your breathing and just be completely aware and present in the moment. And when thoughts come of Ukraine or work or any of this stuff, you just let the thoughts go by, kind of like clouds in the sky, and come right back to your breathing. And it's amazing because if you can really put yourself in the present and create a safe place, it's really good for your system, because so many of us are just completely stressed out with not only Ukraine, but work and life and kids. And even if you can create 10, 15 minutes a day where you're actually going and you're actually focusing on your breath and coming right back to your breath. Another thing that you can do is just release the tension in your muscles. It's kind of like called the wet noodle, because when you're in yeah, it's literally the wet noodle. It's like when you're feeling a lot of anxiety and stress, if you're aware, you'll notice like you tighten up in your shoulders, you tighten up in your, legs, you really get rigid. And so the idea of the wet noodle is to just release the muscles. Okay. And you can do that many times a day, because people don't realize it. They don't realize the mind body connection. But one of the things when we're talking about coping with trauma is learning that connection and learning to let go of the tension in the body.
Now that you say that, I know, I think you don't feel that you're tensed up, but as you say, just like let everything relax, right?
Isn't it? It's crazy. Like when I started noticing this, I was like, wow, like my shoulders go like this. You know what I mean? Like I can feel it. Can't you?
Yes, no, I as soon as you said that, I thought, oh, I'm sitting here a little bit tensed up. Yeah. Well, stay with us. We'll talk about children, how they're being affected by what they're seeing, and how you can talk to your children about it.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus, coverage you can count on.
And we continue our conversation with Mark Sigmund, who's a therapist at Retreat Behavioral Health. Mark, we've been talking about adults and how we are reacting to this situation in Ukraine. Obviously, it's also affecting children, isn't it?
It really is. It depends a lot on their age, on how you deal with it. But for instance, I have an 11-year-old son, and he talks about being stressed about this because he's really into kind of foreign affairs, which is amazing. And he talks about being stressed about this a lot. And so it's really important to be aware of what's going on with your children with regards to this.
How much should you talk to them about it?
You definitely should try to talk to them about it. If they don't want to talk about it, you can let it go. You're just letting them know that you're there for them to talk to, if they're concerned about it. But it depends on their age. A lot of times, like with young children have a hard time differentiating between what's happening overseas in Ukraine and being safe at home. They have a hard time processing this. So you can open the conversation with them by just saying, have you seen what's going on? I'm glad that it's not happening here where we are, and letting them know that they're safe, and letting them talk about what they're feeling with regards to the situation, because safety is huge, and it's huge as a parent. We want to make sure that we have a safe environment for them and they know that they're safe. Because again, trauma is a lot based on that not feeling safe. But it's going to go a long way with your children, your adolescents, to know that you have that open line of communication. And it's really important you're not trying to fix it, right? You're not trying to say, well, you're fine and all this. You say we're safe here, but let them talk about how they feel about the situation.
And again, children are exposed to so much more through social media and seeing so much on television.
Yes. The rule of thumb is they know about it, right? I mean,
Right.
we can't just say, okay, we're gonna make sure they don't know about this, right? So that's the rule of thumb, is that they know about it already. So you might as well breach the topic, and you might as well talk to them about it, and make sure that they don't have any misinformation. Make sure that they're not picking up, misinformation from social media. So it just goes a long way. It goes a long way to set up those lines of communication.
And obviously, children have already been stressed a bit by the pandemic these last couple of years.
Well, that's, as a counselor, I was thinking about this, and I'm like, wow, we went right from 2 years of fight or flight all the time, a lot of times for a lot of people, right into this. So they've been exposed to a lot. And, it is important to make sure you don't have the news going all day. There is definitely some news junkies that will watch the news all day, and their kids they're hearing this all day.
Yeah, I guess you're always amazed that children hear quite a bit.
Oh, they take it in. I mean, I guess there's a part of it where sometimes if they hear enough of it, it's like almost like they become almost used to it, right? But you definitely want to be aware of that, because they can be taking. I mean, for instance, I talked about it last night. I hear this hospital was bombed. Now my son was sleeping, but I could imagine like a kid hearing that, and how that'll bring on that fear and that fight or flight response and things. So.
Does it help to maybe do something? I know a lot of people are, raising money, doing all kinds of things to help people in Ukraine and flying the flag. Would that help a child?
Yeah, I think, anytime with children and adults where you can promote this whole idea of service, service to society, service to other people. There's a couple things that does is it gets you out of your own head, right? It gets you out of like that self-centered, like, oh, what's going to happen to me, and gets you more thinking about, about helping other people, so that whole idea of doing something special, I really like that idea, of being able to fly a flag, or, and to talk to, be able to talk to your children about the importance of giving back. It really opens a conversation about that.
And sometimes then you think about others and not so much focus on yourself.
Yes, because that is, I do a lot of work with addictions too, right? And there's this self-centered element where with a lot of these things, like where we can get obsessed, we call it self-centered fear. Where we're just so obsessed about what's going to happen to us, right? And start ruminating on that. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in recovery is this whole idea of service, giving back, and it gets you out of up here.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, because I know I've fluctuated from being very emotional, crying at seeing some of those images, and then angry at someone who's doing this to other people. So thanks for talking us through it.
Yeah, that response you're talking about is very appropriate, and it's very much like that's what you see a lot of times, is that kind of fluctuating emotions, coming in. And so it's really important not to isolate with it. It's really important to kind of talk about it with your friends, with other people, because I think the more isolated you get with it, and the more you go, just in private. A lot of us like go through our emotional things in private.
Yeah, don't be afraid to tell someone. Well, thank you, Mark, for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.